But I heard a quote this morning by Susie Lavington. She was on the stage with the keynote with our gaffer, Rob Boyles. And it was the most beautiful statement that I heard, which was, "We are planting trees we will never see." And do you know what? Everybody in this room, whether you're in frontline provision, whether you're supporting the provision of education establishments, that's what we're all doing, and that's what unites us. So welcome to this session. Let's get planting some trees, shall we? So a little bit about CSG. We deliver education, we manage pressure, we deliver change from special educational needs to school improvement, energy, workforce development, cost reduction, everything that you can imagine in schools. That's the plug. We're on stand H41, but we've done some research critically, which we're going to take you through now. And I think that research demonstrates that we listen. It's a research about the white paper, and we're going to discuss the findings of that today. And I can introduce our panel, please. So we've got Rachel Hargreaves, the Chief Executive of Ascent Academies Trust. Welcome, Rachel. We have Ruth Gately, who is also a teaching professional, but now is a specialist lead advisor to SEND and inclusion at the Education People. And we've got Steve Lee, the Managing Director of Sensu. They're our research partner. And Steve's going to take us through some of the research findings. What's the purpose of this session? Our research shows a system that is deeply committed to children and young people, but operating at or beyond capacity. And our aim today isn't to criticise the white paper, but our aim is to consider it and explore what makes delivery possible in practice. And I think equipped with first-line experience, SEND experience, and the research, that we're going to do that really, really well. So rather than listening to me, we're going to start with the headlines of the research. Steve, if you can lead the way, please. And then we're going to open up a discussion and hopefully a Q&A session at the end. Steve, over to you.
Thanks, John. So the research was conducted with 500 education leaders from a variety of different settings to give us a broad range of opinions and experiences from across the sector. And then was supplemented with the views of 500 parents as well. So trying to sort of see how the people receiving the service that the teachers are providing are viewing schools and what their side of things is. I'll start with the gloomy news and we'll build up to the more optimistic findings as we go on. But it will become no surprise to anyone that the education sector and the people working within it are feeling increasing pressures. 74% said that over the last year they felt that pressure had increased within their work environment. The biggest causes, the biggest challenges were people behaviour, staff wellbeing and taking care of staff, funding constraints, but then also rising SEND needs as well and how to sort of meet those needs and challenges. The financial pressures that they mentioned were also starting to have a real impact on service delivery. So 42% of the school respondents said that their organisation was currently in deficit, rising to 53% among secondary state schools that seemed to be the part of the education sector that was financially constrained the most. 10% of the education leaders said that they've been in financial deficit for 3 years or more. So it's not a short-term problem, it's something that's been a sustained pressure that they've had to manage. And virtually all schools, 87%, were saying they've had to cut spend in some form over the last 12 months. Again, secondary state schools said had the highest percentage, 95%, saying that they've made financial cuts. Yeah. And those cuts are taking place most within a staff type of staff. So supply staff, 38% said they'd reduced spending on supply staff. 26% of schools said they'd reduced spending on permanent staff over the last 12 months. Other things were also being hit. So operational spend on things like energy or groundskeeping. Some curriculum cuts as well, although to a lesser extent, on arts, music and languages, for example. And the consequences of that are being felt. 68% of education leaders said that these were having an impact on educational outcomes, 75% are having an impact on staff wellbeing, 70% on staff retention. And SEND seems to be the multiplier that sort of increases this pressure and the rising needs. So 89% of schools saying that they had challenges in supporting SEND, and that's something that was true across all the education environments we checked, but it is one where state schools were particularly facing the challenges. And the main barriers there were insufficient funding and resources, limited access to specialist services, lack of staff training or staff confidence, which again, given the fact that we're seeing reducing staff numbers or reducing staff spend, makes sense. And the pressures of that SEND delivery are being linked to increased workload, behaviour pressures, burnout, and wellbeing concerns. So this is the environment that the reforms being proposed in the white paper are landing in, and obviously are shaping how people are perceiving the changes that are coming down the track. But what is interesting is that there was strong awareness of the reforms being mentioned within the white paper, and qualified support for a lot of the proposals that were coming through. So particularly around SEND, that got a lot of engagement. So strong support for the SEND reforms and reasonable confidence in the school's ability to deliver the things that were in its own control, within its own domain. There were concerns registered, and again, these are detailed in the white paper, around there being adequate funding in place to deliver some of the things that have been mentioned, and also some fear of increased risk and responsibility falling on the school and how they're going to embrace that and cope with that. Some of the proposals about moving towards a trust system, again, were being cautiously optimistic in terms of how they were being received. There is a feeling that comes through in the data that the move towards a trust environment could help in terms of solving some of the staffing issues, certainly in terms of SEND expertise and SEND support. The concerns, though, were a loss of autonomy, a loss of flexibility, so a nervousness about being able to still control the environment and the delivery of services to their pupils. Then when we look at the parents' perspective of the last 12 months and what's going on, we get a much more positive picture, and it goes to show how much these pressures are being absorbed by the schools rather than being passed on as experience to the customer, to the parents who are and their children. So parents are largely satisfied with the education experience their children are getting. So 89% said they were at least reasonably satisfied with the performance of their school. And there were high satisfaction levels around teaching quality, wellbeing support, and communications as well. One of the things that the data did show was complaints rising, and schools having to deal with a higher number of complaints, largely around behaviour concerns. But the parents' response was that they felt the schools were doing very well, actually, when concerns were raised, and with good communication, and they felt the school was caring about their concerns and was responding adequately to them. Also, the parents expressed a large amount of empathy with the situation that schools are in. So they recognise the challenging budgetary constraints that they're working under, the staffing levels and so on. So the overall impression we get from doing the research and looking at the data is that the sector really wants these reforms to land and land well, and needs them to solve some of the underlying structural issues that they're facing, particularly around some of the areas we've highlighted. So it was a cautiously optimistic report, really, despite the pressures and the impact of long-lasting pressure.
Steve, thank you very much for that. So that's the research. A quick reminder, there were 1,000 people who contributed toward that research, 500 school leaders, 500 parents. So it's a very balanced view. And I'm also pleased to say that it's not just a criticism, it's an objective review. And there's a copy of the research available on stand H41 if you want to come and join us and have a chat about it afterwards. Right, I'm going to move into some questions, please. So on the research, thank you, Steve, for that. But the SEND pressure and risk transfer, let me start. I'm going to start with you, Rick, if I can. The research shows that SEND reform is transferring responsibility and risk closer to the schools. A, is that fair? And B, as a school leader, how does that feel in the schools on the ground?
Yeah, so just to give a little bit of context, so I'm CEO of Cent Academies Trust, and we're a specialist provision. We're entirely a specialist trust in the North East and North Yorkshire, so spanning 4 local authorities. We have 6 schools, but we're operating out of 16 sites because we're co-located in a number of schools, have taken over empty primary estate to really meet the demand for provision in the area. So there's an element, I suppose, in response that to be mindful, we are still at a consultation stage, so all of the reforms are still at consultation. In terms of that transference of risk, I am kind of an eternal optimist and think with risk there always comes opportunity as well. And I think there's I suppose, a cautious optimism for myself at the moment, thinking there's a real great opportunity from what we're seeing in the reforms, the consultation, around making things better, making a better system for all of our young people. And I would absolutely love for some of our young people to be included within their mainstream schools, but also how we can work greater with other partners to make sure there's that real continuum of provision. In terms of some of the areas, I feel that there is that almost that weight of risk, and I'm really anticipating and holding my breath to see what's going to come out in the detail. I mean, really around the estate and risk, around finances. So if there is kind of that de-delegation of funding from local authority and more funding coming direct to schools, how are what's going to be the accountability measures around that finance, how it's used? What are the expected outcomes? And I'm thinking particularly around that local inclusion model, local inclusion hubs, what's going to be the expectation? And how particularly, I suppose for me, I see that risk where education funding, we've seen that reduce from kind of knowing we had longer term solutions to funding solutions coming or announcements just being on an annual basis. And to me, there's a great risk in being able to have the provision that's right, being able to support a reform and a change, that there is optimism, cautious optimism around landing right, and that what we're not seeing yet is how are the structures and the learning from where local authorities are in deficit situations being, what's the construction of that that's we're not going to be.
My concern with what you're saying there is that whilst there may be some notional funding going toward the problem being outlined, there are so many endemic financial pressures, as the research has shown, that is it actually going to go for the purpose that it's earmarked in the first place? But I don't know. Ruth, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think from the point of view of the Senkos, and I was a Senko before coming into this role, there's that strategic responsibility, which is absolutely right, moving away from the administration side, but there is also that concern, Senkos are concerned, what that looks as in expectation and what that looks like in reality in terms of that legal responsibility and supporting people with SEND and inclusion is still there. It's great to hear that they're going to be the templates for the EHCPs and ISPs, but who's going to be completing those? And again, so there's that real, absolutely strategic role of the Senko, supporting that golden thread of inclusion going through your school. But what's that potentially going to look like with that role? And obviously not quite sure yet what that looks like. But at the same time, I think when you're reading through the white papers, looking at your school and celebrating what you do extremely well every day, that's happening in your classrooms and outside in the open spaces with all of your support staff, and going, actually, we're doing this really well, and let's see what happens, and then celebrating that and knowing what those areas of development are. But it's certainly that responsibility is everybody's responsibility across the school, how that's now going to transfer into a consistent approach across the country.
Thank you both for that. So let me pick up on the word inclusion that you mentioned there, to move the discussion on a little bit. As leaders, we all support inclusion in principle, but can we have confidence in delivery? So what are the barriers to delivering inclusion practically, whether it's staffing, space, funding, or skills? Start with you, Ruth, and then go to Rachel, if that's okay.
I think from the work that I'm doing and going into schools, primary, secondary, special and crews, there's some fantastic work going on, but it's about building that staff confidence around what's being written in the white paper, and also what the consultation is around SEND reform, and ensuring that we give all of our teachers that real confidence in being able to deliver adaptive teaching, to be able to support the needs of those pupils in the school, and having that early identification and those processes in place to ensure that, again, collectively, we're working with the strategic SENCO role overseeing and the leadership team supporting, really driving that forward. And I've seen some fantastic work in the schools that I visit. And again, it's what does that look like? What's that plan? How is it mapped? And what's that direction of travel through your school development plan and that training? I think that's key, is giving teachers that confidence.
Yeah, I suppose some of the local kind of in our area, there's some real barriers around the buildings and the physical spaces and the environment, that school leaders are really trying to work hard to create inclusive spaces. Some of the school estate is tired. You know, lots of Victorian buildings that certainly weren't fit for purpose around acoustics and environment. And I think that as well, that knowledge and understanding about really making sure they're inclusive models. Another, I think, key barrier that we're hearing is just the constraints within the curriculum and accountability measures, where we've got an inclusion, we're consulted on an inclusion agenda, SEND reform, and we still have a very a curriculum that's heavy in content. And with some of the reforms, we're also hearing, you know, that there's more testing and measuring of pupil performance at more age groups, and that comes with that challenge of, I suppose, that confidence around how to really adapt curriculum and not move children on too fast from an inclusion point of view, a SEND inclusion point of view.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. But stay with the children for a moment, and as I mentioned earlier, that the balance of the research included a parental contribution as well as leaders' contribution. And I'm going to go there next if I can. So parents appear through the research, Steve, that you did, more empathetic than the headlines and anecdote might suggest. So I found that a really positive part of the research. Does that surprise you? And how can schools communicate honestly with parents when you're facing day-to-day with the pressures that you've just described? So we'll start with you, Rick.
Yeah, well, we were talking about this earlier because we were both initially surprised by that, and then I had to challenge my own surprise. And I know I speak with our heads all the time to say, sometimes we get so focused and it's so time consuming, the complaints, freedom of information requests, subject access requests. However, we have to remember that it is a very small minority of families who are actually taking that route, and a huge amount of our families are so supportive. I think what we have seen and what resonates with me is that families are on a fight and feel that they're fighting to get whatever outcomes that they believe is best for their young person. And in our setting, where we have young people who get a specialist place, we're often at the end where we've got families who fought for a child to have an EHCP, and then fought for a specialist school place. So I think in terms of how we support that, there's got to be that element of trust and confidence. And what we need is that the trust and confidence sits there, that the tiered approach that's coming in or being consulted upon, that makes the difference, and how we all and with their parents make sure that works.
Yes, yeah, and we can't forget, we're talking about planting trees we will never see, and this is about supporting the young people in the system. That means the family unit. Ruth, any thoughts on that in terms of the parental side?
I think again it's a real it's fantastic that they're showing that schools are really supporting and working with them. To have that response shows that schools are doing a very open and transparent and supporting pupils with or without a diagnosis. It's about every pupil in the school accessing their education. And something that I found in my role as a SENCO, when I was at a school with a very large SRP, is actually being really open and transparent. Parents don't necessarily know what it looks like for their child in the classroom, and it was then saying to parents, this is our universal offer. This is what we do in every classroom to support our pupils. This is what our targeted support is to further support your sons and daughters. And also it was then giving them that opportunity to share their worries and concerns with us so that we could then change the way maybe we did things in school. And also it's an opportunity for parents to talk to parents as well, because they feel very isolated outside of the school. Their experience of school would be completely different to their child's. And I did also make it really clear to parents that I would get it wrong. At times I would get it wrong, but as long as we had that open communication and that we came together as a parent forum, that actually we could then change something. And that was really powerful, because I felt quite vulnerable standing up and explaining what we were doing and how we did it in all our processes. But actually, that had a huge impact. And I know a lot of schools do that. So it's breaking down those barriers for parents and listening to parent voice. And then also listening to pupil voice and working together collectively to make sure that really inclusive package is there for the pupils every moment of the day to the best of our endeavour. And schools are doing a phenomenal job in supporting some really complex pupils, but it's that collective work that really helps drive it forward.
Thank you, Ruth and Rachel. And I think from what I'm hearing there is that we set the tone. And it's for us to set the tone in all of the conversations that we're having. And we can choose to set a positive tone or otherwise. And certainly echoing back to the research, the positivity that we can adopt and embrace in change, because change is uncomfortable, will hopefully help in those messages. I'm going to move us on to budgets. It's a common thread. It's not a new thread that has been here for an awful long time, and this pressure isn't going away. Arguably, the pressure is going to increase as we start to deliver the recommendations outlined anyway in the white paper. I'm going to come to you, Rachel, as a school leader. No doubt you're working under financial pressure already. And in terms of the potential changes that we're going to have to implement as outlined in the white paper, what advice might you have for school leaders in the room? Where would you prioritise? Where do you see the challenges coming in terms of the positive changes we've outlined so far?
Yeah, I mean, it is a really challenging time, and we've been braced, haven't we? Or kind of information's been fed or seeded to us that it's going to get more challenging. And I think, I suppose that, I am an advocate. You'd expect that as a CEO of a multi-academy trust, that I'm an advocate for the trust sector, because what I see is that we're able to really sensibly collaborate, and some of the things that we're able to do as a trust, we wouldn't necessarily be able to do if all of our schools were completely separate standalone schools. And some of that has been also around how we collaborate with others. So we, as I said, some of our co-located sites, we work with maintained schools where we're co-located, other trusts. We've worked really effectively with local authorities to say what's within your estate that's going to help meet that demand. So I think it's, for me, the collaboration is absolutely key in how we get the right people in the right areas together to serve the communities. And where we've got collective responsibility to say, these are all of our children in this area, this community, regardless of their ability, their demographic, they're all of our children. Let's all work together to look at how we get the solution. and how we do put that pressure and lobby and advocate to say we need sensible long-term funding so that we can collaborate effectively, because we'll know what our 3-year, 5-year anticipated spend is. That it becomes a real barrier if it's just a year on year, because you need really good, strong relationships and you need really good, strong representation within the sector. If you think of a Venn diagram and put education in the middle, all of those different partners need to collaborate.
I really echo that. And as one of the senior members of the Commercial Services Group, CSG, what I advocate and certainly see in all walks of the various solutions we provide into education, collaboration is fundamental. And nobody has a monopoly on good ideas. And the system isn't just in the education establishment, it's everything that ripples around it. And how do we ensure that we work well together to find these new solutions and provide innovation that's going to be required? So with change, we've got to welcome change. And we've got to accept it. What we can't do is just say, this is the old solution which we've had, and expect it to keep working with different budget constraints. It's just not possible. So how do we drive collaboration would be a key message I would take out of this to underpin the delivery of the impending white paper and the research which is carried out. Ruth, have you got anything to add on that?
Just like saying, Kent, we moved last year in developments into communities of schools, so primary, secondaries, maintained, and academies all working together. And again, it's that real collaboration and that outward facing and supporting and sharing expertise and being able to have those opportunities to have discussions. And with that, we also, all schools have access to linked practitioners, so educational psychologists, speech and language, and SENIA and other around health. So again, we've moved to a greater collaboration that's still developing, but again, even within that school, it's about sharing that practice internally as well as then outward facing and finding out where that expertise in your area. So schools that have a real knowledge and understanding of SEMH or supporting pupils who are vulnerable, and what have they done to help and support. So again, collaboration of professionals supporting professionals is really, really important, and I've seen it really work, and it means that you don't feel isolated. As a Senko or as a school, it's about we're all working together for all of our pupils in our area to make sure that they have that really bright future.
Thank you, Ruth. I'm looking at the clock and we've got 2 minutes, 14 seconds left. Steve, is there anything in the research that we haven't teased out or haven't discussed which is important that we must comment on whilst we're having a chat?
Well, I think one of the things that I'll mention, just because we're able to get it in under the wire, because it's only just been announced, was the mobile phone ban. And there's very strong support amongst teachers, but even stronger support amongst parents for it. But again, as you might expect, the theme from the other report, the nervousness is the practical delivery of it and the expected pushback from pupils and parents. So planning ahead, I think, to preempt some of those things, to manage the communication and how it's going to be implemented is going to be an interesting challenge. Might be a good time to buy shares in those little wallets that you have to drop your phone into when you go to school. But that was one of the interesting things that came out from a parent's perspective, I suppose.
Okay, thank you. And again, another take on inclusion is how do we treat people equally in a way, whether it's seen as a positive or a negative. Look, I'm going to have to wrap this up. But thank you. It's been my privilege to be surrounded by such expertise today, to enjoy and shape our business from the research by listening, to have the opportunity to have a platform to discuss it with Chief Executive of the Academy Trust, with our SEND Special Advisor and teacher. So you've done us proud today. You've opened up the discussion. On H41, which is the stand for CSG, we'd like to open it up for further chat. Please come and join us. Speak to our panellists. I will guide you through them. You can speak to me as well if you like. But yeah, like I say, have a coffee, come and have a chat. Let's explore this further. The white paper is coming. Let's embrace it, see it as positivity, and see what we can do with it. So thank you to the panellists. Thank you very much for giving us your time. Thank you for giving your time.